Section 19 of Confessions, volumes 5 and 6. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions, volumes 5 and 6, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, anonymously translated. Section 19. My impatience to arrive at Chambéry had made me use more diligence than I meant to do. I had sent a letter from Valence, mentioning the day and hour I should arrive, but I had gained half a day on this calculation, which time I passed at Chaparillan, that I might arrive exactly at the time I mentioned. I wished to enjoy to its full extent the pleasure of seeing her, and preferred deferring this happiness a little, that expectancy might increase the value of it. This precaution had always succeeded. Hitherto my arrival had caused a little holiday. I expected no less this time, and these preparations, so dear to me, would have been well worth the trouble of contriving them. I arrived then exactly at the hour, and while at a considerable distance, looked forward with an expectancy of seeing her on the road to meet me. The beating of my heart increased as I drew near the house. At length I arrived, quite out of breath, for I had left my chaise in the town. I see no one in the garden, at the door, or at the windows. I am seized with terror, fearful that some accident has happened. I enter, all is quiet. The laborers are eating their luncheon in the kitchen, and far from observing any preparation, the servants seem surprised to see me, not knowing I was expected. I go upstairs, at length see her, that dear friend, so tenderly, truly, and entirely beloved. I instantly ran towards her, and threw myself at her feet. "Ah, child," said she, "art thou returned then?" embracing me at the same time. "Have you had a good journey? How do you do?" This reception amused me for some moments. I then asked whether she had received my letter. She answered, "Yes." "I should have thought not," replied I, and the information concluded there. A young man was with her at this time. I recollected having seen him in the house before my departure, but at present he seemed established there. In short, he was so. I found my place already supplied. This young man came from the country of Vaud. His father, named Vintzenried, was keeper of the prison, or, as he expressed himself, captain of the castle of Chillon. This son of the captain was a journeyman peruke maker, and gained his living in that capacity when he first presented himself to Madame de Warrens, who received him kindly, as she did all comers, particularly those from her own country. He was a tall, fair, silly youth, well enough made, with an unmeaning face, and a mind of the same description, speaking always like the beau in a comedy, and mingling the manners and customs of his former situation with a long history of his gallantry and success. naming, according to his account, not above half the marchionesses who had favored him, and pretending never to have dressed the head of a pretty woman without having likewise decorated her husband's. Vain, foolish, ignorant, and insolent, such was the worthy substitute taken in my absence, and the companion offered me on my return. Oh, if souls disengaged from their terrestrial bonds, yet view from the bosom of eternal light what passes here below, pardon, dear and respectable shade, that I show no more favor to your failings than my own, but equally unveil both. I ought and will be just to you as to myself, but how much less will you lose by this resolution than I shall? How much do your amiable and gentle disposition, your inexhaustible goodness of heart, your frankness, and other amiable virtues compensate for your foibles, if a subversion of reason alone can be called such? You had errors, but not vices. Your conduct was reprehensible, but your heart was ever pure. The newcomer had shown himself zealous and exact in all her little commissions, which were ever numerous, and he diligently overlooked the laborers. As noisy and insolent as I was quiet and forbearing, he was seen, or rather heard, at the plough, in the hayloft, woodhouse, stable, farmyard, at the same instant. He neglected the gardening, this labor being too peaceful and moderate. His chief pleasure was to load or drive the cart, to saw or cleave wood. He was never seen without a hatchet or pickaxe in his hand, running, knocking, and hallooing with all his might. I know not how many men's labor he performed, but he certainly made noise enough for 10 or a dozen at least. All this bustle imposed on poor Madame de Warrens. She thought this young man a treasure, and willing to attach him to herself, employed the means she imagined necessary for that purpose, not forgetting what she most depended on, the surrender of her person. Those who have thus far read this work should be able to form some judgment of my heart. Its sentiments were the most constant and sincere, particularly those which had brought me back to Chambery. What a sudden and complete overthrow was this to my whole being! But to judge fully of this, the reader must place himself for a moment in my situation. I saw all the future felicity I had promised myself vanish in a moment, all the charming ideas I had indulged so affectionately disappear entirely, and I, who even from childhood had not been able to consider my existence for a moment as separate from hers, for the first time saw myself utterly alone. This moment was dreadful, and those that succeeded it were ever gloomy. I was yet young, but the pleasing sentiments of enjoyment and hope which enliven youth were extinguished. From that hour my existence seemed half annihilated. I contemplated in advance the melancholy remains of an insipid life, and if at any time an image of happiness glanced through my mind, it was not that which appeared natural to me, and I felt that even should I obtain it, I must still be wretched. I was so dull of apprehension, and my confidence in her was so great, that notwithstanding the familiar tone of the newcomer, which I looked on as an effect of the easy disposition of Madam de Warrens, which rendered her free with every one, I never should have suspected his real situation, had not she herself informed me of it. But she hastened to make this avowal with a freedom calculated to inflame me with resentment, could my heart have turned to that point. Speaking of this connection as quite immaterial with respect to herself, she reproached me with negligence in the care of the family, and mentioned my frequent absence, as though she had been in haste to supply my place. "Ah," said I, my heart bursting with the most poignant grief, "what do you dare to inform me of? Is this the reward of an attachment like mine? Have you so many times preserved my life for the sole purpose of taking from me all that could render it desirable? Your infidelity will bring me to the grave, but you will regret my loss." She answered, with a tranquillity sufficient to distract me, that I talked like a child, that people did not die from such slight causes, that our friendship need be no less sincere, nor we any less intimate, for that her tender attachment to me could neither diminish nor end but with herself. In a word, she gave me to understand that my happiness need not suffer any decrease from the good fortune of this new favorite. Never did the purity, truth, and force of my attachment to her appear more evident. Never did I feel the sincerity and honesty of my soul more forcibly than at that moment. I threw myself at her feet, embracing her knees with torrents of tears. "No, madam," replied I, with the most violent agitation, "I love you too much to disgrace you thus far, and too truly to share you. The regret that accompanied the first acquisition of your favors has continued to increase with my affection. I cannot preserve them by so violent an augmentation of it. You shall ever have my adoration, be worthy of it. To me that is more necessary than all you can bestow. It is to you, O my dearest friend, that I resign my rights. It is to the union of our hearts that I sacrifice my pleasure. Rather would I perish 1,000 times than thus degrade her I love." I preserved this resolution with a constancy worthy, I may say, of the sentiment that gave it birth. From this moment I saw this beloved woman but with the eyes of a real son. It should be remarked here that this resolve did not meet her private approbation, as I too well perceived. Yet she never employed the least art to make me renounce it, either by insinuating proposals, caresses, or any of those means which women so well know how to employ without exposing themselves to violent censure, and which seldom fail to succeed. Reduced to seek a fate independent of hers, and not able to devise one, I passed to the other extreme, placing my happiness so absolutely in her, that I became almost regardless of myself. The ardent desire to see her happy at any rate absorbed all my affections. It was in vain she endeavored to separate her felicity from mine. I felt I had a part in it, spite of every impediment. Thus those virtues whose seeds in my heart begun to spring up with my misfortunes, they had been cultivated by study, and only waited the fermentation of adversity to become prolific. The first fruit of this disinterested disposition was to put from my heart every sentiment of hatred and envy against him who had supplanted me. I even sincerely wished to attach myself to this young man, to form and educate him, to make him sensible of his happiness, and if possible render him worthy of it. In a word, to do for him what Anet had formerly done for me. But the similarity of dispositions was wanting. More insinuating and enlightened than Anet, I possessed neither his coolness, fortitude, nor commanding strength of character, which I must have had in order to succeed. Neither did the young man possess those qualities which Anet found in me, such as gentleness, gratitude, and above all, the knowledge of a want of his instructions, and an ardent desire to render them useful. All these were wanting. The person I wished to improve saw in me nothing but an importunate, chattering pedant, while, on the contrary, he admired his own importance in the house, measuring the services he thought he rendered by the noise he made, and looking on his saws, hatchets, and pickaxes as infinitely more useful than all my old books. And perhaps in this particular he might not be altogether blamable, but he gave himself a number of airs sufficient to make any one die with laughter. With the peasants he assumed the airs of a country gentleman. Presently he did as much with me, and at length with Madame de Warrens herself. His name, Vintzenried, did not appear noble enough, he therefore changed it to that of Monsieur de Courtille, and by the latter appellation he was known at Chambéry and in Maurienne, where he married. At length this illustrious personage gave himself such airs of consequence that he was everything in the house, and myself nothing. When I had the misfortune to displease him, he scolded Madame de Warrens, and a fear of exposing her to his brutality rendered me subservient to all his whims, so that every time he cleaved wood, an office which he performed with singular pride, it was necessary I should be an idle spectator and admirer of his prowess. This lad was not, however, of a bad disposition. He loved Madame de Warrens, indeed it was impossible to do otherwise, nor had he any aversion even to me. and when he happened to be out of his airs, would listen to our admonitions, and frankly own he was a fool. Yet notwithstanding these acknowledgments, his follies continued in the same proportion. His knowledge was so contracted, and his inclinations so mean, that it was useless to reason, and almost impossible to be pleased with him. Not content with a most charming woman, he amused himself with an old, red-haired, toothless waiting maid, whose unwelcome service Madam de Warrens had the patience to endure, though it was absolutely disgusting. I soon perceived this new inclination, and was exasperated at it. But I saw something else, which affected me yet more, and made a deeper impression on me than anything had hitherto done. This was a visible coldness in the behavior of Madam de Warrens towards me. The privation I had imposed on myself, and which she affected to approve, is one of those affronts which women scarcely ever forgive. Take the most sensible, the most philosophic female, one the least attached to pleasure, and slighting her favors, if within your reach, will be found the most unpardonable crime, even though she may care nothing for the man. This rule is certainly without exception, since a sympathy so natural and ardent was impaired in her by an abstinence founded only on virtue, attachment, and esteem. I no longer found with her that union of hearts which constituted all the happiness of mine. She seldom sought me but when we had occasion to complain of this newcomer, for when they were agreed, I enjoyed but little of her confidence, and at length was scarcely ever consulted in her affairs. She seemed pleased, indeed, with my company, but had I passed whole days without seeing her, she would hardly have missed me. End of section 19. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.